Picking a main champion to play in League of Legends is one of the most important things you can do, but finding the exact champion that fits your playstyle can be pretty difficult with so much choice, particularly in mid lane, which has the greatest champion and class variety of any role. In this video, we're going to go through all of the different mid laners, each categorized by difficulty and class. For each one, I'll talk about strengths, weaknesses, playstyle, and any additional info you might need to know. I'll also give suggestions for what kind of players they may appeal to in order to help inform your decision. As always, all the different sections and champions will be timestamped below, so without further ado, let's get into it. Assassins are the solo queue stompers of League of Legends. If you want to make montages, execute flashy combos, and outplay your opponents 1v1, then the assassin class will probably appeal to you. Assassins are often thought of as being hard to execute and somewhat one-dimensional, but you'll find that this take is a bit outdated. The class itself has a lot of variety from champ to champ, but the one thing that remains consistent is having some of the highest 1v9 potential of any class in the game. Let's start off with Diana. Diana is one of the easiest assassins to pick up, and she offers a really easy gateway into the rest of the assassin class, especially if you want to work your way up to something more difficult. She has relatively straightforward combos and trading patterns, but also a lot of room for skill expression, specifically when it comes to playing the side lane and choosing the right moment to engage. Whilst Diana is primarily picked against either immobile mages or burst assassins, she has a ton of flexibility in both build and runes to enable her to play almost any matchup or situation. You can play her as a full AP assassin, as a fairly tanky bruiser, or even as a hybrid of the two. Additionally, like several other assassins on this list, Diana is a very powerful jungler, which makes her a great option if you want a champion to cover multiple roles. All of this versatility makes Diana one of the best one-tricks in this video, and a final bonus to sweeten the deal is that if you secure a pentakill with the Winterblessed Diana skin, the entire map gets covered with this really cool visual effect. Similar to Diana, Naafiri is a champion I highly recommend to newer players looking for an assassin to start with. Despite her straightforward nature, she's a very satisfying champion to play, with the potential to pull off some really disgusting outplays. Naafiri's kit comes with plenty of inbuilt forgiveness. Your Q will allow you to farm from range in more difficult matchups, and a combination of both your W and a naturally tanky build will ensure that you don't instantly explode after one mistake. This makes Naafiri an excellent champion for learning the game itself, without having to invest a ton of time into massing Naafiri before you start to find some success. If you want to play an Assassin Bruiser hybrid that scales extremely well into the late game, I'd really recommend trying Naafiri. Now moving on to our medium difficulty assassins. First up, we have Ekko. Ekko is in that wonderful sweet spot of being both approachable to play whilst also having a very high skill cap, meaning this is a champion you could stick with for a long time and still have room to grow. Ekko is known for his crazy snowball and skirmishing potential, as well as being one of the most difficult champions to deal with once he gets ahead. One thing worth noting with Ekko is that his difficulty heavily draws from fundamental game knowledge and timing, as opposed to some of the more mechanically intensive, in-the-moment assassins, which could be a positive or a negative depending on what kind of assassin you're looking for. Overall, Ekko is a pretty unique take on the assassin playstyle, and is well worth trying if the others aren't clicking for you. Talon is the quintessential assassin, featuring the highest first blood of any mid laner by a significant margin, as well as some of the highest total kills and solo kills per game. Talon is the champion you want to play if you just want to kill people. He has excellent roaming, skirmishing potential, and is one of the most destructive 1v9 champions in the hands of a smurf. His high kill pressure and strong wave clear granting him the ability to solo kill your opponent and easily translate that lead across the rest of the map. Talon does pay for this agency over the game by being rather unforgiving, and especially weak if you fall behind or make any major mistakes, and therefore will require some time investment to really see results. That being said, if you like pushing your limits and you really enjoy the knife's edge playstyle, then I think you'll love playing Talon. Fizz is perhaps one of the most annoying little rats in this entire game and might be the champion most likely to make your opposing mid laner break their keyboard. If you want to make your opponents regret ever playing this game, then mastering Fizz is for you. With a super powerful early game featuring high 1v1 kill pressure, amazing gank setup, and the ability to easily pick up kills in the river or off other lanes, Fizz can easily take over a game completely. The difficulty and downsides of Fizz come in the mid to late game. While he doesn't exactly fall off, he becomes a lot harder to play, as people tend to group up and there are far fewer opportunities to make picks. A good Fizz can still make it work, but the best Fizz players are going to make sure that the game never gets to this point to begin with. Kassadin offers a very different playstyle to most champions on this list, being extremely weak in the early stages of the game, and most of the difficulty coming from managing that very weak early game. Not just to ensure that you survive, but so that your teammates don't suffer too much as well. If you can manage to neutralize, Kassadin really comes online in the mid game and scales exceptionally well into the late game. If you can manage to pick up a couple random kills here and there, Kassadin's snowballing potential is second to none, and it's no surprise that he boasts one of the highest pentakill rates of any mid laner. While Kassadin can be one-tricked, I'd highly suggest pairing him with at least one other champion, as his weak early game makes him best used as a counterpick into matchups where either you can scale for free or find some easy kills. Now, for our most difficult assassins. Despite having an absurdly high skill ceiling, I almost put Zed in the medium difficulty tier, because his fairly low skill floor and ability to neutralize bad matchups make him less punishing to learn than some of the other assassins. That being said, after playing in Z99 and on Zed many times in Korea, I was convinced that the sky really is the limit with this champion. Zed has always had insane outplay potential, but with the rise of haste-focused builds giving access to more sustained damage and lower cooldowns, his playmaking potential has really gone through the roof. Zed's playstyle overall is quite unique, with him being considered the mage of the assassins, or sometimes jokingly being referred to as a range champion, due to his spammable long-range combo. If you don't enjoy the single-target assassin style and instead prefer killing the entire team instead, or if you're just looking for a champion to invest thousands of hours into, it's absolutely worth giving Zed a shot. Qiyana is another champion we'd consider top of the line when it comes to 1v9 potential, primarily due to her insane snowballing and lack of effective counterplay once she does get fed. The big downside to Qiyana is it can be pretty difficult to get the ball rolling in the 1v1. Like most assassins, she's an incredible skirmisher and can easily get fed, but that initial laning phase can be very punishing if you don't know the exact extent of your limits. Qiyana, I'd highly recommend to people looking to make big plays in montage moments, as long as you're willing to get over the hurdles that you may face initially. Akali is the most popular assassin amongst higher elo and professional players, largely in part due to her stable early game. Most assassins are somewhat reliant on random skirmishes and the general chaos of solo queue in order to not fall behind, but Akali functions reasonably well even in a slower game. There are trade-offs for this safer laning phase though, as Akali really lacks wave clear, and if you fall behind you'll find it pretty hard to kill minions, let alone champions. Most assassins on this list tend to do very well into squishy and ranged champions. Akali is not only good into these, but also does really well into just about every other melee or assassin champion that you'd see in mid lane. So in other words, she's a great champion to have as part of a pool, but probably isn't as rewarding a one-trick as some of the other champions on this list. If you're looking to pursue a more fundamental-based assassin, particularly if you're higher elo already, then Akali could be well worth your time. Katarina is the original montage champion of League of Legends, topping the charts for kills and pentakills for all champions. Katarina is the most mechanically demanding assassin, and extremely punishing when it comes down to choosing your moments to engage. Learning this champion is not for the faint of heart, and there are virtually no Katarina players outside of one-tricks, because the time investment required to become a good Katarina player is pretty significant. Katarina is reliant on a somewhat cheesy playstyle, in that she must take risks and make some coin-flip plays in order to make up for her fairly weak 1v1 laning phase. A great Katarina player can find ways to mitigate her weaknesses and maximize her skirmishing strengths in order to weight those coins in your favor and completely dominate games. If you want the most extreme embodiment of the assassin playstyle, then look no further than Katarina. Our final assassin is LeBlanc. LeBlanc is a very difficult champion to learn, with not only an insanely high skill cap, but also a very high skill floor as well. She is amongst the most rewarding assassins to learn on this list, however, with very high outplay and carry potential. Similar to Akali, LeBlanc could be considered a more fundamental assassin, and this is part of what makes her so difficult. You will not only need to have a fairly solid grasp of how to play mid lane in general, but also invest the time into learning LeBlanc's many combos or matchups. Oftentimes, this can be very painful, as LeBlanc is completely useless from behind. Once mastered though, you have the tools to carry almost every game. Watching a great LeBlanc player is extremely impressive, and playing against one feels equally oppressive. LeBlanc is one of my favorite champions to play and absolutely worth learning, just don't expect it to be easy. Burst mages play somewhat similarly to assassins, but are typically ranged instead of melee, and in compensation for this, lack a little bit on the mobility side. They are still incredibly powerful in skirmishes, and are often more so in the early laning phase compared to a true assassin, but they have to position much more carefully, lest they are caught out of position. Burst mages tend to also be much better in 5v5 fights than most traditional assassins, giving them one of the most straightforward win conditions of any class, just by grouping up on objectives and winning key fights. This is a major reason why they find so much success in every elo. Vex is another champion that I very often recommend to new players, with a simple yet effective kit focused on blowing up key targets. She's particularly good in lower elos, where you're unlikely to face as many ranged mage matchups or get punished for her fairly average laning phase. One of the biggest bonuses of easier champions like Vex is it's very easy to remain consistent from not only game to game, but also just fight to fight, which is one of the biggest factors for climbing. If you want to get inventive, ability haste focused builds are also viable, and this can push her towards more of a control mage style. Overall, Vex is an easy answer to melee champions if you struggle with those, and it's a solid choice to learn the mid lane fundamentals with. Annie has always had a reputation of being one of the easiest champions in the game, and for good reason. Her combos are easy to pull off, the game plan is pretty clear cut, and she even has a built-in mechanic to help with farming. In spite of that though, she has a fairly high skill ceiling, centered mainly around bear micro and E usage. Additionally, Annie is actually really versatile despite having this simple kit. She can run a variety of runes and builds which allow her to deal with tons of different matchups and compositions, and the various roles that she can cover throughout the game make her one of the best champions for climbing solo queue, especially for beginner players. Aurora is about as close as you can get to a perfect champion for solo queue. She has mobility, huge teamfight and skirmishing power, a strong laning phase, flexibility in draft and builds, strong side laning, and the list goes on. In essence, as long as Aurora's numbers aren't nerfed into the ground, she will always remain a very strong pick for solo queue. There can be quite a bit of difficulty to Aurora at first. The QE combo is rather slow, and using your W and R bounces to their full potential isn't easy. But don't be deterred. If there is a single champion every mid laner should know how to play in today's League of Legends, it's Aurora. Zoe is one of the hardest champions in the entire game, and has historically been a terror in both competitive and solo queue alike. She can be one of the most frustrating champions to play against, being able to inflict massive amounts of damage from extremely far away with little to no warning or counterplay. Her strong laning phase and incredible skirmishing make her an excellent pick for even the most chaotic of solo queue games. She can start to fall off a little later in the game, especially into tankier compositions however. Even so, Zoe is a fantastic one-trick, and may even be the most popular mid-lane one-trick in GM and Challenger elos, largely for her ability to just annihilate solo queue. Learning Zoe can be a bit of an exercise in frustration at first. The options for every given situation can be pretty overwhelming, and ulting forward at the wrong time can easily get you killed. Once it clicks for you though, this champion is exceptionally powerful, and at least for me, one of the most fun champions in the entire game. Control mages are the most common archetype of mid laner in both competitive play and in higher elo solo queue, for very good reason. Control mages bring a lot to any composition, normally featuring great wave clear and teamfight damage. In addition, they often feature high amounts of CC or very powerful laning phases. This makes them among some of the most well-rounded champions in the game, and ideal for players who want to play the game on a more strategic level, or if you want to play a more controlled and standard game instead of team deathmatch. Malzahar is your most basic control mage, being one of the easiest champions to climb with up until you reach some of the higher elos. His super basic kit is especially good as a pick for newer players looking to take off some of the mechanical load of the game while they learn how everything else works. While Malzahar can be basic, it's still pretty satisfying watching your dots and pets deal ridiculous amounts of damage in a teamfight, and I always get a special tingling feeling making people miserable with his point-and-click ultimate. Overall, Malzahar can be surprisingly fun, and is a really good entry point to control mages. Another relatively easy to pull off mage is Veigar. He's heavily focused on scaling, and is particularly difficult for shorter range compositions to deal with. Veigar is one of League's oldest champions, and so may feel a little clunky by today's standards compared to some of the more fluid or updated mages. He also does tend to lack power in the early game, which has become increasingly important in modern day League of Legends. Still though, he is fairly fun to play, and if you can consistently make it into the mid-game, you should see some success. Anivia is the literal definition of a control mage, with massive amounts of wave clear and zone control, which make her an absolute nightmare for melee-heavy compositions to deal with. Anivia is definitely on the mechanically easy side, but getting the most out of your wall and other CC abilities requires a little bit of foresight and game knowledge. As such, you might find Anivia easy to pick up and play at first, but reaching high ranks with her is a whole different story. I'd really recommend Anivia to people who want a one-trick control mage on the simpler side, but with enough skill expression to remain interesting. When people ask me for a champion to crush the laning phase with, I always say Viktor. Amongst control mages, Viktor's laning phase is second to none, and has winning matchups into the vast majority of the mid lane roster. He scales into a late game monster too, being one of the few control mages that has the potential to delete an entire team in the late game. There are some drawbacks though. Despite being strong in the 1v1, his early skirmishing in 2v2s or 3v3s is particularly lacking, and the lack of mobility and self-peel until he gets his upgrades can make him unforgiving to play. As such, Viktor is a decent blind pick, but he's an exceptional counterpick champion, especially if you're struggling to deal with other mages. Over the last couple of years, Taliyah has become one of the most popular mid laners being played in higher MMRs. Her kit is extremely well rounded, and she has the tools to navigate almost any situation. High wave clear, compounded by a global ultimate, provides her the ability to heavily impact the map, even in more difficult matchups. Her CC synergizes extremely well with any jungler that provides CC of their own, and the combination of low cooldowns and high damage make her an extremely strong scaler as well. While the variety of options in any given scenario can be a bit daunting, you can get a lot of power out of Taliyah simply from her Q and E, which are relatively straightforward abilities. So I would encourage you guys not to be deterred by her high skill cap, and give a try to one of the most fluid control mages out there. Femboys are becoming increasingly meta, and Riot really rose to the challenge with Hwei. Hwei is one of the most different champions Riot has ever released, featuring a total of 10 different abilities. In spite of this, his difficulty is vastly overrated, most of it coming from getting used to pressing 2 keys to cast an ability instead of 1. His versatility allows him to be played in multiple positions, namely mid, bot, and support. His high wave clear and self-peel tools can make him a fairly strong blind pick as well. Being one of the more recently released control mages, Hwei's abilities are visually pretty spectacular, especially when compared to some of the older mages that have more bland spell effects. Hwei would be an ideal choice if you're bored of normal champions and are looking for a truly unique way to experience League of Legends. Syndra is one of the best mages you could invest time into, simultaneously having a very high skill cap from her combos and skill shots, but also being relatively forgiving due to her incredible scaling safety net. Syndra is strong at virtually all stages of the game. Her high damage and low cooldowns make her a strong laner, and easy access to CC and burst let her take over any early skirmish. In teamfights, you can opt into a CC heavy build, focus on making life as miserable as possible for the enemy frontliners, or you can build as a full glass cannon and one-shot any squishy that dares to enter your range. I'd highly recommend anyone looking to climb to higher elos on control mages to consider having Syndra as part of your pool. If I had to choose one mage that every mid laner should know how to play, it would be Orianna. Orianna has been the queen of mid lane for many years, and if you're ever not sure what to pick in a game, you should probably just pick Orianna. She's good or even great at just about everything, and fits into a variety of compositions. Large rune and build variety enables her to fulfill a ton of different roles, easily being able to go full damage and burst to one-shot squishies, sustained damage builds make her into a strong side laner and capable of winning most 1v1s, and finally haste builds make her a solid facilitator to strong bruises or hypercarries. If you're looking for a single mage on this list to one-trick, I'd highly recommend you go for Orianna. Azir is amongst the hardest champions in the game, as a champion that rests heavily on not only mechanical ability, but requiring immense game knowledge and fundamentals as well. It's very possible to put hundreds and hundreds of games into Azir and still not see the results you would see on other champions, simply because he really requires you to be a very good mid laner as well as a very good Azir player. As such, I wouldn't really recommend him to players below Master Tier. If you aren't deterred by this, however, once mastered, his kit is massively overloaded, complete with mobility, engage, peel, DPS, push, basically everything you would ever need as a mid laner. You can be punished by certain matchups in the early lane, but first item onwards, you tend to be stronger than just about any other mid laner, and it only gets more and more out of control. Azir also has some of the most montage potential of any control mage, and many pro player highlight reels are bound to include several crazy Shurima shuffles or other outplays. If you can stomach a brutal learning curve, then Azir will return your investment many times over. Our final control mage is my favorite champion of all time, Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia is unquestionably the most mechanically demanding control mage, so if you want a mage that really rewards mechanics and isn't so heavy on the brain requirement, she could be the one for you. Cass has incredible damage output, with extremely low cooldowns and the ability to easily 1v2 or even 1v3 if she gets fed. She is very unforgiving though. Missing your poison will render you almost useless, and being so short range makes you an easy kill if you even slightly miss position. She can actually be a pretty good one-trick though. She's very viable in not just mid lane, but top lane and bot lane as well, and there is even a Q-max Cassio build which can deal with some of the longer range mid lane counterpicks. If you watched the video to this point, you owe it to me to at least try one Cassio game. And who knows, maybe you'll fall in love with the champion the way I did. Battle mages are pretty similar to control mages, but tend to lack crowd control in exchange for being a lot tankier and willing to dive deep into teamfights. These sort of champions can be good for players who want to play more of a mage or spellcaster style, but maybe you're uncomfortable with the squishiness and positioning requirements that control mages demand. Swain is an absolute elo hack of a champion that I recommend to players all the time. His game plan is very simple: group up and 5v5. His kit is built around skirmishing and taking major objective fights. His innate tankiness means that you can be forgiven for a lot of the positioning errors lower elo players tend to make, and he's an absolute demon from ahead, pun intended, quickly becoming a 1v5 machine. If your current champion pool struggles with assassins or engaged champions, Swain can be an easy answer to plug the hole without needing to invest a ton of time into learning him. You could probably consider Aurelion Sol a control mage, but I decided to put him here for his very unique playstyle. Sol is one of League's premier scaling champions, boasting the highest win rate in the late game of any mid laner. You'd think that he sacrifices his early game for this, but good Aurelion Sol players can abuse his strong level 1 and ability to chase opponents down the lane with his W. Once you pick up Ryze, his skirmishing becomes top notch and will allow you to scale up even quicker. In higher elos, some Aurelion Sols have started to play in bot lane in order to avoid some of the more difficult mage matchups, so if you decide to one-trick him, you can easily play him in both roles. I think this champion is super underrated in general, and if left unchecked is an absolute monster. Our final battle mage is Vladimir. Vlad is a very weird champion, utilizing health as a resource cost and having large amounts of sustain to go with it. It can be pretty difficult to start the snowball on Vlad, and you have to be very picky about the fights you choose to take in the early game. Laning against Vlad, though, is very different from laning against most other champions, so in lower elos especially, you might be able to find yourself some easy wins, as people just don't know what you can do. This can become a lot harder as you rank up, however, as people get more familiar with your kit and how it plays. Most of Vlad's difficulty comes from navigating this weaker early game and taking advantage of the windows presented so that you can scale quickly into the teamfights. His teamfighting is very strong, but it can be a little complicated, with a lot of reliance on flanks and timing to really pop off. Vlad is another champion I'd say is underrated, but more so as a counterpick into certain compositions or matchups that lack the ability to shut him down early. Facilitators are primarily built around pushing and making plays together with your support and jungle. They tend to have very high impact in the early game, but can sometimes fall short in later teamfights if you haven't built enough of a lead either for you individually or for your teammates. Most of the facilitating champions will only be able to neutralize or build slight leads in their 1v1, so instead you want to focus on getting involved in as many skirmishes and river fights as possible. Galio is the easiest facilitator to pick up, and can also be a great option if you're struggling against either assassin mid laners or dive compositions. He is one of the best skirmishing mids in the entire game, with solid base damages and an excellent CC chain, especially when you're paired with fighter junglers. A variety of builds means that Galio can fill the role of anything from a tank to a full AP assassin, ensuring that no matter what champions you are paired with or against, you'll be able to have at least some impact. He can struggle against some of the stronger laning champions, and if you don't accelerate the early game, you can find yourself getting outscaled by most mages. A criminally underrated champion for solo queue is Lissandra, who, despite being in our facilitator class, actually has a lot of individual power and carry potential. Lissandra is best used as a counterpick, either picked alongside engaged junglers and supports, or into teams heavy on melee carries and assassins. Her extreme amount of CC makes her a nightmare to deal with, and she can combine this with either burst items to eliminate a single target straight away, or with tankier items to buy time for more CC rotations. I'd recommend Lissandra primarily to mage players who just want something to be able to deal with the champs in situations that often make their lives miserable. Ahri has been the most valuable pick to learn in solo queue for many years now. She's incredibly well-rounded, her sustain and wave clear allowing her to neutralize bad matchups. Her W movement speed and mobility with her ult bring even further forgiveness to her kit, making her particularly adept at dealing with solo queue's chaotic nature. If you're ever not sure what your champion pool needs, or you just want a champion to cover as many situations as possible, you really can't go wrong with Ahri. Despite being a jack of all trades, she's notably more powerful when you pair her with AD ganking junglers like Veigar Zinzao, or alongside engaged supports like Rel or Leona. However, this is absolutely not a requirement. She's a very solid blind pick, and these pairings just serve as a nice bonus. If you're looking for a champion that really rewards macro play but is a bit lighter on mechanics, then you'd undoubtedly enjoy Twisted Fate. TF's abilities can be a little unintuitive at first, but are actually rather simple, and you'll quickly find yourself able to pilot the champion to a solid level. That being said, the difference between a good TF and a great TF is very noticeable, with a large emphasis on knowing how to pressure the map and side lanes throughout the entirety of the game with your global ultimate. Whenever this champion is meta, he becomes an absolute solo queue terror and will enable you to climb the ranks with ease once mastered. Ryze has a complex identity, being a mishmash of facilitator, side laner, and battle mage. I put him in this category though because the majority of your early game will be focused on leveraging your push over mid into 2v2s or 3v3s with your support and jungler. Damage-wise, Ryze scales pretty well into the late game too, but his short range means that against longer range compositions, you can really struggle to actually deal your damage. As such, you're looking to snowball yourself and other lanes as Ryze, and then transition into a strong side lane threat to avoid team fighting on an even footing. Instead, you can look to create yourself a massive golden XP lead with your crazy farming capabilities, and you can easily secure numbers advantages for your teams through your push and then ultimate. Ryze is definitely not an easy champion to play, but if you want to be able to pressure the map early without sacrificing your 1v1 laning phase, then Ryze could be the one for you. Neeko isn't played much these days, but she's honestly super underrated. Strong laning phase and CC makes it easy to begin snowballing, and her powerful team fighting allows her to regularly seal the deal. The thing that keeps most people away from Neeko is her very unique playstyle. A combination of control mage plus engager is weird enough, but the disguise mechanic complicates her gameplay even further. If you decide to invest time into Neeko, you can also look into playing her in other roles. She functions very well in both the jungle and support positions, making her a valuable flex pick in the draft. Similar to Ryze, Neeko is a great facilitator to pick up if you want to be able to heavily impact early objectives or river fights without necessarily exchanging laning strength for it. Artillery mages place a heavy focus on winning fights before they even begin. These champions have immense range and high amounts of damage, and so when they do manage to secure a lead, they can become some of the most frustrating champions to deal with. If you fall behind though, it can feel like tickling a brick wall, made even worse if the enemy team has high amounts of mobility, lifesteal, or engage tools. The most forgiving, and in my opinion the most powerful artillery mage is Lux. I absolutely hate playing against Lux with a passion. Her high range and harass tools make laning against a good Lux very annoying. She can be difficult to punish too. If she holds Q and W defensively, it can be really hard to aggress onto her, and her ulti offers a get out of jail free card every minute by instantly one-shotting a wave and resetting. Unlike most artillery mages, Lux features high burst as well, meaning that your poke before a teamfight is often just catching someone out and one-shotting them. She does have some pretty major weaknesses though, namely side laning and immobility, but I'd say these aren't really noticeable outside of very high elos, and I think she's one of the best champions to pick up if you just want to climb quickly. Mel is Riot's newest artillery mage, with all the bells and whistles you might expect from a new champion's kit. Her W allows her to reflect abilities, and so as a counterpick into certain champions or compositions can be very rewarding. In spite of this, Mel's abilities are very slow and easy to dodge, which can make her somewhat inconsistent from fight to fight. You can overcome this with skill or patience, however, holding your cooldowns to their opportune moments, or following up other people's crowd control with your own. If you want to one-trick Mel, I'd actually recommend playing her bot lane, as the matchups tend to be a little more forgiving and a second champion can help guarantee your combo. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Ziggs, released all the way back in 2012. Ziggs is the artillery mage with the greatest snowball potential. His ability to blow up turrets accelerates the game and can skyrocket his gold lead. Low spammable cooldowns means that Ziggs that gets ahead will leave little room for the enemy team to crawl their way back into the game. While he does lack CC, he possesses some mobility, which is normally a major weak point of longer range mages. Similar to Mel, Ziggs has easier matchups in the bot lane, and this is his most common role in high elo. He's still a very viable mid laner though, especially in games where you know you can get some sort of lead and begin your snowballing early. Xerath is the artillery mage with the highest skill ceiling. He's even more skill shot reliant than other artillery mages and is by far the easiest to kill. Xerath also has the least actual skirmishing strength, so in early game and teamfights you will need to land poke on key targets, otherwise you won't be able to win the fight. There are some major upsides though. A semi-global ultimate allows him to easily snipe kills or land poke across the map. And his extreme range, even by artillery mage standards, means that even in the late game you will still be able to ignore tanks and focus on more important targets. Xerath is a difficult champion to learn, and can be quite unforgiving, but he's one of the most fun mages out there. So if the poke mage playstyle really resonates with you, you need to try Xerath. Fighters are the bruisers of the mid lane, boasting strong 1v1 laning phases and big side lane win conditions. These champions tend to be a little weaker when it comes to bigger fights, and handshaking 5v5s without being overly fed will lead to a quick defeat. Most of your game will be about leveraging that 1v1 strength in order to accelerate yourself and make the enemy mid laner's life as difficult as possible. One of the highest risk-reward champions in the mid lane is Sylas. From ahead, this champion is disgustingly strong, easily able to 1v2 or even 1v3 with his massive damage output whilst also being incredibly tanky. However, if he fails to get a lead or if he lacks powerful ultimates to steal, Sylas can feel very underwhelming. He's best used as either a counterpick when game-changing ultimates are shown, such as Malphite or Alistar, or into matchups that you know you can easily snowball. If you like high-risk playstyles but don't want to play something as squishy as an assassin or mage, then Sylas offers a playstyle that's a perfect fit for snowballing solo queue games. If Sylas is high-risk, Yone is more like managed risk. This champion is insanely greedy and requires you to follow a very specific game plan, but his scaling is out of this world and can easily 1v9 games if left unpunished. For Yone, much of the early game needs to be spent building up a 1v1 lead and choosing fights carefully, as before you hit 2 items, you're generally too squishy to be a part of any major fight. Instead, you'll have to use your 1v1 strength to prevent the enemy mid from joining fights. From 1 item onwards, a big focus needs to be on gathering XP and gold from the side lane. Once you do hit 2 items though, it's time to start making montages, and it only gets crazier as the game goes on. Yone is a great champion to play if you like a high APM, mechanically intensive playstyle that isn't quite as punishing as something like Aurelia or Yasuo. Jace is a hybrid champion, able to switch forms between melee and range. He combines the playstyle of a fighter with that of a poke mage, and is one of the strongest champions in the game when truly mastered. These days, Jace is a bit more at home in the top lane, as many of the mage matchups mid can be pretty difficult, but you can definitely still make him work. You're likely to enjoy Jace if you want to play the poke or artillery mage style, but still want to retain the ability to skirmish or secure kills when your opponents miss position or stay around for a bit too long on low HP. Jace isn't a champion I'd recommend if your goal is just to climb in the short term, but as a long-term main, I think he's one of the best. Yasuo is a top 3 mid when it comes to difficulty. He's extremely mechanically demanding at every stage of the game, and there is realistically little to no room for error on the macro side either. Yasuo has the fighter's strengths and weaknesses taken to the extreme, being an insane champion in the 1v1 as well as the side lane, but sadly lacking in the 5v5 unless he's paired with specific combos like Diana or Rel in order to provide him with some setup. If you're going to play Yasuo, it pretty much has to be as a one-trick. He's just too difficult for most players to have as part of a pool. If you're still not deterred by now though, Yasuo has almost infinite outplay potential, and the plays you can make on this champion make him one of the most enjoyable champions to watch at a high level. Our lucky last fighter is Aurelion, who in my opinion is the most difficult mid laner in the entire game. This champion is insanely fun to play, as you can regularly create massive CS leads or pick up solo kills, and once you hit Blade of the Rune King, you're basically Thanos. You do still have to be careful of taking major fights, especially if your flash is down, as until you get tankier items, you can easily be CC'd in one shot. Aurelia scales surprisingly well for a champion with such a good early game, simply because she has so much access to extra gold from farming waves, creeps, and turrets super efficiently. She probably has the most 1v9 potential of any mid laner, compensated for by being immensely punishing if you do fall behind. Overall, she's a super sick champ, insanely flashing with a nearly limitless skill ceiling, and could easily provide you with a challenge for the rest of your league career. Mid lane AD carries are pretty uncommon these days, but I figured I should mention them just in case. ADC mids tend to be greedier picks, and are often very difficult to pull off. ADCs naturally are pretty difficult champions to play, requiring precise precisioning and to stay very high on farm at all times, as you won't be bringing anything to the table if you fall behind. As such, it's best if you can pick ADC mids into easy or free matchups, or alternatively alongside an AP jungler to avoid the enemy team stacking too much magic resistance. Corki is going to be your most consistent mid lane ADC. He does have some bad matchups, but overall he's a pretty strong laner, a fairly good skirmisher, and has decent scaling. Corki is easy mechanically, but his difficulty comes from needing to accelerate and farm 10 CS per minute. Otherwise, you'll probably be outperformed in fights and skirmishes by mages. It's very important to know how to cheese people level 1 with E, and look for key windows to be at a W forward. His W and Triforce HP make him a little more forgiving than most AD carries in terms of positioning, but without the mega scaling that other AD carries have, he can really fall flat later in the game, particularly into tankier compositions. I'd recommend Corki mid mainly to people just struggling to find an AD mid for their pool. If you're looking for counter picks, Tristana is a really good ADC mid, with a very strong early game and great scaling as well. The downside is that, similar to Corki, Trist needs to accelerate, so it's important to pick her into matchups that you can either spam push in, or against champions that can't stop you from easily jumping forward. I'd recommend trying to stay away from picking into strong laning champions or mages with CC. Tristana is also pretty hard to play. It'll require a lot of APM to effectively deal damage with all her attack speed, and it's very easy to W in at the wrong time and die, or W out too early and lose all your DPS. Make sure this is a champion you've practiced a lot of, or are just picking in situations where you can easily snowball from. Another greedy ADC is Smolder. While he's fairly simple on the mechanics side, his scaling being highly dependent on farm and stacking makes him fairly difficult to pull off. Ideally, you want to pick him in matchups where you won't be pressured early, such as Galio or Malzahar, as this will ensure you reach your power spikes before the game is decided. If you do manage to get through the early game, the Smolder champion becomes insanely overpowered, with some of the strongest teamfight power of any mid laner. Look towards Smolder if you want to consistently outscale your opponents and play for a late game win condition, or if you just want something to punish greedy blind picks. Kayle technically isn't an AD carry, but I didn't really know where else she should fit on this list. Kayle's early game is very similar to Kassadin's, with a lot of focus on trying to neutralize the game for both you and your team. She's a great team fighter for two major reasons. Her massive amount of DPS makes her ideal into shorter range compositions, especially those that lack CC. Secondly, her ultimate is a very powerful tool for surviving engage or permitting your team to dive deep into the enemy backline. I think Kayle works best as part of a pool, where you can pick her alongside bruiser junglers like Hecarim or Xin, or with AD carries with high damage output such as Jinx, Kai'Sa, or Aphelios. You can also use her as a counter to any mid laner who can't pressure the lane hard or is very reliant on bursting a single target. Akshan is another weird champion that is partway between being an AD carry and an assassin, making him a great pick for people who enjoy playing marksman but want to have a greater impact on the early game itself. Akshan is almost exclusively played by one-tricks, relying heavily on snowballing the early game, as from an even or losing game state, Akshan will be next to useless. If you have a strong grasp of his limits and can master his somewhat unique and cheesy playstyle, you'll find Akshan to be an excellent solo queue pick, and one that can slingshot you through the ranks faster than almost any other. That's going to be it for this video. If you did like the content, don't forget to subscribe and let me know if you'd like to see more of this style of content in the future. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below or ask me live on either YouTube or Twitch. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.